Yup. Type moon. You know the drill. What's up, dudes? I don't know. I just got done watching the Demon Slayer movie, man. Damn. Still thinking about Demon Slayer. Dude, Unfootable is so fucking good, man. I just spent 30 minutes talking about Mahoyo. Alright, I'm gonna assume this is the right one. Not Mahoyo, Demon Slayer. I spent 30 minutes talking about Demon Slayer, Unfootable, and how Unfootable is gonna be so goated. Man, they're gonna do the Mahoyo movie pretty good, huh? Let's see. Now, let us rewind 5 hours prior to this gluten for punishment going to bed. It was 7 o'clock in the evening, just after an unproductive discussion between the two mages and the boy had ended. Leaving her roommate and the intruder in the drawing room, the girl walked alone through the foyer. From there, she headed to the west wing. These were Alice Kwanji's personal chambers, in which even her roommate Aoko Aozaki seldom dared to step foot. The foyer was illuminated only by pale moonlight. Hard footsteps echoed throughout the dreary, moonlit lobby. In such mansions in Japan, there was no custom for removing shoes at the door. Hence, Alice crossed the foyer in her boots. She only removed when she relaxed in her bedroom. Suddenly, she remembered something from her childhood. She used to enjoy the feeling of the cold, hard wood floor on her bare feet and walk around the foyer on particularly sunny days. After her father affectionately scolded her for it, she never did it again.
そうだったわね。青子は結局守らなかった。
She let out a quiet sigh. Alice's new roommate, whom she took on after coming to Japan, would not comply with her instructions.
落ち着かないものはしょうがない。
Ako would say, changing into her slippers. Ako might have found it natural to do so, given that she lived in a typical... What the hell? What's this? What the heck? Huh? Ako might have found it natural to do so, given that she lived in a typical Japanese house through middle school. But every time Alice heard her flip-flopping through the foyer, she wanted to cancel the cohabitation. By now, Alice was not particularly bothered by it anymore. Human's adaptability was remarkable at times and gracious at others. The emotional attachment of the past had proved far too brittle under the weight of reality. What if I had rice on my neck? I don't remember eating rice. I don't think. The little blue bird was perched on the banister. Its tiny chirping made Alice stop and look its way.
今夜は放っておくわ。今は青子の問題よ。
Can I put this on auto? The lack of filling her voice made the bird tilt its head as it sang. It thrilled, as though questioning its master's uncharacteristic leniency.
約束は約束よ。今夜ぐらいは多めに見ないと。青子と彼はそれだけの活躍をしたのだし。
She said to the bird, her voice betraying her discontent. If you win, I'll let you go. She would keep that promise in spite of the unquenchable desire to fight that burned in her chest.
でもその後の処遇は別の話。条件付きのゲームに勝ったぐらいで、いつまでも得意げでいられるのは心外だわ。
Perhaps it was a perfectionism born of fadiciousness, but despite her prim demeanor, Alice Kwanji was a sore loser. It did not matter to her whose magecraft was superior. Losing the game had proven hard to move on from. The little bird fluttered its wing in agreement. Tricking Alice's contempt, it was itching to dive bomb the invader. It looked like a soldier saluting a superior officer as it preened itself. The bluebird turned to face his master. A light-hearted tweeting seemed to display a desire to deal with Sojido first thing in the morning.
そうね。理由さえできたのなら、瓶なり本なりに入ってもらいましょう。
Except her words lack any bite. On the face of it, they were chilling kind one might come to expect from a witch's lip, but then again so tame as to remind you of a certain robin's flapping.
しばらくの話よ。けど、それも一時だけ。私の我慢も長くは続かないし。だいたい、青子も人にかまけていられる立場じゃないわ。いつかもすれば思い知るでしょう。そうすれば。
When the time came, expelling him would be simple. Alice was well aware her roommate was a pragmatist with no vision. The situation she created would not allow her to wait around. She could only afford to protect that boy for 3 or 4 days at most. Beyond that, Alice sensed Alko would crack and say something like, "You take care of this, Alice."
それまで待つか。あるいは、私の我慢が効かなくなるか。どちらにしても、結果は変わらないわ。
Alice Kwanji would suffer no more irritation. And protecting a witness, let alone allowing them to live in her mansion, was an indignity. Alice looked up, fascinated by the dense fog that had crawled into the foyer. Above the fireplace was a single mirror. Roughly 3 feet in diameter, it decorated the wall where one might find a painting. Its surface was faintly clouded and vaguely reflected the foyer's appearance.
スナークをなくした影響でしょうね。鏡の機能、しばらくは制御できないみたい。
The little bird joyfully chirped as his master mumbling. The bird attempted to imply that there was no need for her to lift a finger, not if the nuisance would fall into the mirror on his own accord. Or perhaps, had the little bird had not sang, Alice would not come to the same conclusion. For some reason, she recalled an earlier conversation.
これでも一番無難だと思う。
In response to a question, the boy inside the bottle shrugged his shoulders and answered. From his perspective, the city and the mansion were no different. It seemed that, having just moved from the countryside, everything was something he had never seen before.
自慢できることじゃないが、まだ書き物さえ満足にできないし、都会のルールは複雑すぎて、何が正しいのかさえ区別がつかない。
One embarrassment, his voice was full of resentment. He was angry about something, though Alice could not tell what. But
だから、どこにいても危ないことに変わりはないんだ。極端な話、道を歩くだけでも、人と話すだけでも不安になる。俺は、どこでだろうとうまくやっていける保証はないんだよ。けど、ここにはそんな奴に気を使ってくれる人がいる。気遣ってくれる理由は物騒なものっぽいけど、それは本当に贅沢なことだと思うんだ。
her eyes swelled up ever so slightly. Those soft words were something she could not brush off, because they made sense to her. Given that everything in the city was a danger to him, nothing had changed after coming to the mansion. In reality, he had no reason to fear this place in particular. If anything was different from the outside, it would be that someone here was his ally. In that view, he had been sincere, entirely sincere. His explanation hadn't contained any flattery towards Alice Kwanji, more pandering to Ako Aozaki. He was simply speaking from the heart. I like it here.
今、鏡に迷い込まれるのは迷惑ね。鏡の機能は侵入者の探索に専念させたいし、彼が迷い込みそうになったら止めてあげて。
The bird shook his feather at her strange instruction. Alice looked away from the mirror and continued her walk. The bird chirped in
あな
protest.
たの仕事よ、ロビン。それぐらいの役には立って。
Leaving the bird with an icy retort, she vanished into the west wing. All that remained was the moonlight, and the little blue bird trembling in its perilous prospect of unprecedented change. Nice to meet you. Alright. It's there's only 12 chapters, so I'm like halfway there. Should save. next episode. Are you for real? Do I click it? Okay. Once long ago, I saw a beautiful bird fly overhead. Round and round it circled the distant blue sky. How high it flew in this era when humans, not birds, reigned supreme. And yet the bird was completely uninterested in humanity's endless desire for expansion, our creation of even higher homes, or the smoke bellowing from industry chimney. The sky extends further than the eye can see. It belongs to no one, not now, not then. The bird was a truly noble creature, flapping its wings powerfully across the wild, ancient sky. Until the sound of cold iron, and when it shot, its symmetry gone forever. Cruel and tragic, its body plummets downwards. Not knowing its fate, the bird frantically beat its wings to the very end. One moment soaring with the eyes to the sky, the next crashing down to the dry, hardened earth. This was the dream I saw. No matter how much I thought about it, its details remained clouded. What did that bird look like, for instance? I had to make sure my fan is on level 3.
今日の授業はここまで。試験範囲の総まとめなんかやっちゃいましたけど、これうちのクラスだけですから、よそのクラスには内密にお願いしますね。
How you do auto
担
mode?
任特権と思ってください。ほら、原告の平均点ぐらいは学年一番にしておくと、皆さんも鼻が高いと思いまして。
I wonder if I can read that fast. Mr. Yamashiro chuckled as he finished. Oh! This was the typical of a kind of teacher responsible for year 2 class C, the master at relaxing his pupils.
先生、口元に本音出てる。鼻を高くしたいのは私たちじゃないですよね。
鼻っていうかメンツですよね。
Oh, Autumn was
先
so
生
much better.
里中先生に嫌味言われてばっかりだし。
つうかはっきり言えばいいんすよ。お前ら頭悪すぎだって。いやまあうちのクラス見事なまでに体育会系ばっかりだけどさ。
いえいえ、テストの点数だけが学生生活ではありませんから、僕から言うべきことは何も。先生方もそこまで目くじら立ててるわけじゃないので、別にクラス全員が赤点でも僕の人生には何ら関わりはないんですけどね。しかし一方では一人厄介な御仁がおりまして、皆さんが選んだ全校生徒代表の方なんですが、これが恐ろしいのなんの。テストの点数が低いのは生徒ではなく教育する側が無能だからです。教育委員会への報告準備はいつでもできていますので、と日夜脅してくるんですよ。それでも生徒たちが治らないようなら、その時は直接私が監督しますとか、生徒としてどうなんですかね、あれ。
The warm atmosphere in the room suddenly fell below freezing. The student class C now knew who the true enemy was.
あーそっか、山城先生生徒会の顧問だったっけ。ナムナム。
さすがは応援団を立ち直らせた女傑。教師一人退職に追い込むなど造作もね。
やっぱりな、会長絶対年サバ読んでるって。あの迫力同年代と思えねえし、ほらうちの女子と比べると特にこうおっぱい的に。
先生、木の実だけでも A 組に引き取ってもらえませんか。そりゃ男子はみんな猿ですけど、こいつだけレベルの違う猿ですよ、絶対。
あれでも女子 A 組だけどあんまり成績良くねえよな。中の上ぐらいじゃなかったっけ。
そうだけど別にいいんじゃない？塾も行ってないし、生徒会仕切ってたまにバイトまでしてるんだから。あれで学年トップだったら逆に気持ち悪すぎ。
だよな。首位は副会長に任せとけばいいんだよ。
まあまあ皆さん、噂話はそのあたりで。地獄耳という言葉もありますから。じゃあそれなりに復習をよろしく。あんまり点数が悪いと冬休みそのものがなくなりますからね。あ、それとしずきくん、ちょっといいですか？
Mr. Yamashiro gathered his things and beckoned for Sojiro to join him in the hallway. Damn, Automo is godlike. There were no other students to be seen despite it being break time between classes. Voices were audible in the distance, but the hall itself felt strangely quiet and calm. Perhaps it was due to the sense of confinement, wrapped up by the lack of windows. Usually students spent their breaks either in the classrooms or in the veranda.
何ですか、山城先生。
いえ、そう大した用事じゃないんですけどね。試験前にこんな話をするのもデリカシーがないんですが、気になったので。どうだろう、学校には慣れたかな。
Though this level of concern from the teacher startled him, Sojiro felt reassured. It was only natural. After having had to deal with such difficult personalities lately, Mr. Yamashito's trivial question were refreshing.
はい。学校の作りや決まりなら自分なりに分かってきました。友達も増えましたし。
そっか、それはよかった。うちのクラスは口の悪い面々だけど、その分気を使わなくていいからね。しずきくんと相性が良くて助かったよ。
Sojiro's eyes shone brightly in appreciation. In awkward words, Mr. Yamashito was a brutish, forgettable, downright, detestable man who did not even deserve the title of teacher, but Sojiro found him considerate in his own
アルバ
way.
イトもほどほどにね。試験前だって言えば大抵のところは休ませてくれるから、あまり無理はしないように。また試験で困ったことがあったら周りに相談しなさい。一人で悩んでいても時間の無駄だよ。ほら、学校っていうのは話し相手にだけは困らないから。
In a wave of his hand, Mr. Yamashito was gone. The pure-hearted Sojiro gave him a solemn nod, as if to say he accepted the advice of his so-called forgettable teacher and went back to his classroom. And then...
女のことで相談だ。
Sojiro had not wasted a moment in putting Mr. Yamashito's advice into practice.
そうらしい。難問にぶち当たっているんだ。深く考えてみて気づいたんだが、どうも自分は発想が貧困らしい。
Sojiro averted his eyes out of shame over his lack of insight.
いや、豊かだと思ってたことがびっくりなんだけど。まあいい、こっち来い。
Shocked as he was, Hinomi grabbed Sojiro by the shoulder and pulled him over to the wall. Hinomi had nearly burst out laughing with Sojiro with a straight face and admitted his difficulty with girls, but he realized it was the first time Sojiro had ever turned to him for advice. Sojiro was always able to break down any task at his part-time job to bite-sized pieces, but he's clearly struggling with a different problem now. That was going to take some serious effort.
で、なんかやっちまったのか？よ。
これからやるのかもしれない。木の実、例えばの話、マッドベアにハリセンボンみたいな女の子が入ってきたとする。その子は俺が嫌いで、マッドベアから出て行ってほしいようなんだけど、俺はマッドベアを辞めるわけにはいかない。
Sojo explained that he couldn't just quit his part-time job at the restaurant. He needed the money. Hinomi grunted a few times to indicate he was still following Sojiro's story.
つまりその女を追い出したいと。
逆だ。なんとか認めてもらいたい。隠していたけど、俺はその女の子が嫌いというわけじゃなくて。
Sojiro furrowed his brow. Hinomi could not help but laugh at his friend's lack of manly resolve in his answer. Girls were the one area where Hosuke's skill and experience were triple those of Sojiro.
なんだよ、要はナンパかよ。むしろ仲良くなりたいってわけ？
Sojiro wasn't sure how to respond. He nodded slowly without really understanding the implication of what Kinomi had said.
けど、どうすればいいのかわからない。そもそもどうやって同い年の女の子と仲良く話ができるんだ？
クラスの女どもとは話してんじゃん。あれでいいんだっつの。俺は羨ましいっつの。持ち前の天然系で押してけばいいべ。山育ちってのは希少なアイデンティティだと思うぜ。珍しいものは生かさないとさ。
そうかな。珍しいというのはあんまりいいことじゃない気がする。だいたいそもそも嫌われている場合はどうすればいいんだ？クラスのみんなは親切だけど、相手はハリセンボンだ。いや、この際ハリネズミでもいい。
そういう場合はめげなきゃいいんだよ。相手が折れるのを待つって寸法だな。トゲだけに。
Sojiro's brows sunk deeper still.
この例え話はダメだ。
He needed more concrete material to work with.
ばっか。女なんてのは機嫌を取ってればいいんだよ。まずは女の趣味とか大事にしてるもんとか聞いて、そこをフォローすればいい。自分の都合より相手の都合だ。まずは外堀から攻めろってことだな。
外堀？外回りか。
もち。その後はまあ結局はこれが一番効果的なんだけどな。袖の下ってやつ？プレゼントで釣れ。そん時の需要と供給さえ合えば、嫌われてても受け取ってもらえる。受け取らせちまえば、あとはそれが義理になるってもんだ。
Hinomi then proclaimed with an odd sense of pride that this approach had resulted in only failure for him.
けど問題がある木の実。確かにご飯とかそういうのをおごってもらうと嬉しいけど、
そんな金はないってんだろ。分かってる分かってる。仕方ないね。そういうしずきくんのために一丁割のいいバイトを紹介してやろうじゃねえのよ。
He slid from the side of the classroom deeper into one corner, to in front of the lockers where no one ever stayed for long. It would be days before Sojiro realized the suggestion he was receiving for the illegitimate kind, the kind he should not have shared with anyone. Damn, man, reading is fucking hard. Fuck. Alright. That night, Dinner at the mansion was a feast of bread. They just ate bread? Alright, soft slices lay stacked at the center of the table, surrounded by various colored jams. Oh, okay. Bread with jam. In a bowl, a salad, mainly lettuce. Oh. With a small plate of unevenly cut ham. Alright. Sojiro may have no frame of reference of what an average family dinner should be, but he could tell this was certainly not normal. In truth, it was a first-rate case of laziness.
チョコのペースト切れたままじゃん。アリス、新しいの買っておいてって言わなかった？
You meant Nutella,
今日は一日部屋にこもっていたから。
chocolate spread, paste, jam,
第一、
Nutella,
チョコレー
butter.
トを食べるのはあなただけよ。自分のものは自分で調達をするべきね。
For these two girls, however, this dinner seemed to be completely normal. They had a system of irregularly taking turns being in charge of meals. Tonight was Alice's turn. Normally, she would spend as little time and effort as possible, only truly applying herself when there was something to celebrate. Of course, Sojiro was none the wiser to Alice's unique approach to food preparation. For him, it was a plain lackluster meal. And when it came to dinner, not saying anything to each other was another staple of their meals. The sound of cutlery, the scraping of chairs, and the tick-tock of the clock were the only thing to be heard in the sunroom. Sojiro himself had already eaten. At this moment, he was watching the things going on from the drawing board. Our room.
宗十郎、9時からアルバイトでしょ？行ってらっしゃい。私たちのことは気にしないでいいから。
Okie dokie.
ああ、じゃあ行ってくる。
Sojiro donned his coat with a goodbye nod. But Sojiro glanced again at the sunroom. He momentarily locked eyes with Alice, or so he imagined. She had been ignoring him all day. And not just refusing to talk to him, she had avoided him so much so as to not look at him all day until this very moment. He could understand if he was annoying her as an outsider in the mansion, but he felt no animosity in her gaze just now.
今の様子を見てたのかな。
Sojiro looked nervously at his surroundings for a moment before heading to the foyer. Alice only let her gaze return to normal, when she was completely sure he was gone.
ああ、めんどくさ。
Akko was appalled by Alice's brazen display. So much so, her immaculate veneer of apathy crumbled.
何？献立に不満でもあるの？青子。もちろんあるけど、いつものことだし慣れてるわよ。私が呆れてるのは、あんたの意地の悪さの方。
Bully.
徹底的に無視してるくせに、相手の反応を伺ってるなんてめめしくない？罠張って待ち受けるようなもんじゃない。彼の反応なんて探ってないわ。そもそも興味がないもの。それと、今のは差別発言ね。めめしいという表現は女性軽視に過ぎるわ。今の場合なら、あなたは矛盾していると言ってちょうだい。うわ、
自覚ありときた。
Choosing not to rise to her roommate Jibe, Alice resumed eating. Ako tore off pieces of bread and ate them one by one, anger still visible on her face.
じゃあここからは青崎青子としてじゃなく共犯者としての質問ね。アリス的に彼を見逃していいと思える判断材料はない？ありえないけど実は彼も魔術師でしたなんてオチであったとしてもここに住まわせるのは容認できない？その理由なら認めるわ。彼を許すのではなくそんなことに気づかなかった私たちへのペナルティとして。そうね、今のは絶対にありえない話だけどそれと同じに絶対の結論もまたないわ。彼がここに住む選択を飲む場合すらあるかもしれない。気の迷いは私にだってあるのだし。ええ、そういうことよ。今は私との義理とかプライドで冷静を保ってるあんただけどあいつの努力次第で少しは。それは諦めて。彼が何をしようと無駄だから。あなたも知っていると思うけど。
Alice had never been the type to let her guard down around others. The young witch despises humans, having recreated so many of their objects in fairy tales.
そんなのはあんた個人のトラウマでしょ。自分の意固地さを魔女の血統云々で棚上げするのはそれこそめめしいわ。いいじゃない。嫌いなら嫌いではっきりしてれば。私が気に食わないのはね、あんたのどっちつかずの態度よ、アリス。どっちつかずの態度？そう。無視するなら徹底して無視してやれって言ってるの。ガチガチに守りを固めて、そのくせ城門だけ開けて、獲物が油断して入ってきたら串刺しにする気満々とか、相棒として見てられないわ。あいつにできることなんて、閉ざされた門を開けることぐらいだっていうのに、その機会さえなくすのはどうなの？ごめんなさい、青子。もう少し簡単に言って。その例えはちょっと。
Alice seemed unable to grasp Ako's metaphor. Meanwhile, Ako had it up to here with her roommate lack of self-awareness and was starting to lose her cool.
だから興味ないとか言っておきながら粉かけるなってこと。あんなにチラチラ盗み見たらあいつ変に勘違いしちゃうかもしれないでしょ。アリスはああ見えて本当は自分と仲直りしたがっているに違いない。じゃあ早速部屋に押しかけてみようとか。そういうことになるの？なる。少なくとも私だったらいい加減イライラして話があるなら校舎裏まで来いって決着つけかねないレベル。この毒。そうだったのね。気をつけるわ。別に彼と話をする気はないんだし、私も彼を見ていたというより彼の手足を見ていたのだし。
I can see why people say that this is fucking hard in Japanese. Nasu use a lot of fucking words that's like no one else fucking uses.
手足は手足よ。彼個人には思うところはないけど、あの夜の出来事はまだ記憶に新しいから、それが少しだけ気になって、つい視線で追っていたのね。あの夜って遊園地のこと？なんかしたっけあいつ。
Alice's expression soured. She still felt the sting of her defeat.
飛んだでしょ、彼。レールの上から
私のダンプティに向かって。
そんなこと言ってたわね。勢いでつい1メートルぐらいだから飛んじゃったとか。
Akko had not actually seen it in person, luckily. All she knew was that the spell she had placed on Sochiro was part of the reason he survived that jump of death. Alice, on the other hand, had observed the whole scene from the clock tower. It had only lasted an instant, but it had burned itself into her mind's eye. More than when her precious moon had fallen at Alco's hands, and the flat snort come tumbling down.
でも、それがどうしたの？卵の敵討ちってわけ？
Tamako, egg.
ダンプティは壊れるのが仕事だから、敵討ちも何もないわ。ただ、人間の体ってあんな風に動くんだなって。
As it goes. For someone with a little human interaction as Alice, Sojiro's leap must have appeared quite remarkable. Particularly because his legs was order of magnitude less capable than those of an animal in the forest. And yet, even with such feeble legs, with those meek arms of his, he managed to fly through the open air like a bird. To her, it was akin to the feeling city folk get when they see a wild creature in its natural habitat.
気にしないで。機会があるならもう一度見たいと思っただけ。
Okay.
別に彼に何を期待しているわけじゃないわ。
Kare? Kare means
なる
him,
ほど。
right?
アリスのプロイって大体が人型じゃないしね。単に物珍しさで見ていただけか。
Akko sighed and released the tension from her shoulders. She was disappointed to discover that Alice's behavior stemmed from simple curiosity, like that of a child with a new toy. And Alice was in no position to take issue with her reaction. And how could she? She was not entirely sure what it was that she herself was feeling.
夕食、明日は私が作るから。試験前だってのに、こんなしょぼくれたもん食べさせられたら、一夜漬けする気合も湧かないわよ。
Yeah.
ご自由に。私も手が空いて助かるわ。
I don't need water. Night came and went in the mansion. Oh, don't move too much, my stomach. Oh my god. For better or worse, the disturbance caused by the very invader had not yet caused the kettle to boil over. And my tummy still hurt. I put too much spices in making nacho cheese. And too much milk. The next morning, at 6:30, as sunlight spread out across the sky, Sochiro walked to school with Akko in the chilly morning air.
いい？洋館にいるときは、極力一人にならないこと。
It was her intention to keep Sochiro safe until he left the mansion. Nonetheless.
眠い。6時から登校とか、あんたも働き者ね。
そうでもないよ。30分仕出しを手伝うだけだし。
His work ethic was a little too strong for a student entering finals.
それより青崎、無理してないか？別にこっちに付き合うことないんだぞ。
ご心配なく。生徒会室で仮眠取るから。約束だし、門までは一緒に行くわよ。
I like that she got multiple outfits, Akko. But eternally, Ako was worried. What traps did her roommate have in store for him? She could not imagine Alice had planned anything to go down in the woods, but she wanted to be safer than sorry. At least she could do was accompany Sojiro to school. That much she was firmly committed to. Any trap that presented themselves could then be dealt with on the spot. Well, not dealt with as much as destroy, since that was Alko forte, but that would be enough to keep him safe for a long time.
帰り道に関してはアリスもそこまで暇ではないと信じるしかないんだけど。
If Alice was willing to put all her energy into a new trap after the first had failed, then she were as good as dead anyway. But Ako would cross that road when she came to it. It all depended on how deep Alice's dislike of Sojiro really went. It would have been enough to make her abandon her pride as a witch, something she had protected fervently until now. If that were the case, Ako knew she would never be able to keep him safe. The moment 24/7 protection became necessary was the moment she had failed. Her character led her to focus on what she could do in the here and now and ignore the rest. And this current plan of action of hers was the best attempt at doing right by everyone. They left behind the Kwanji estate, and the two remained together into the residential area at the bottom of the hill. Where Ako glanced casually at Sojiro. What's up, Skydam?
ところで何か考えてる？
Don't know how long I'll stream. It depends how my stomach feel. So far, so good, I guess. Surprisingly, Sojiro saw through her harmless question and sensed the bigger issue. How was he going to win Alice over? I made homemade nacho cheese because I made some nachos, but I don't know. According to his friend, there were 3 basic approaches he could take. One was the roundabout approach.
こいつは時間がかかるが最も自然だ。人間ってのは自分が好きなものを大切にされるとコロッと気を許しちまう。仲間意識ってやつだな。
In other words, instead of focusing on the person he wishes to win over, one should focus on their interests. Shower her with gifts. It was a surprising, mature opinion coming from Kinomi. Unfortunately, Sojiro had no idea what sort of things Alice liked. She seemed very fond of the mansion, but what could he do to clean it for her? He sensed that would have the reverse effect. He had the distinct feeling that she would not want him touching what was precious to her. The second approach was to take the inner track.
でもやっぱり本人を落とすのが一番早い。俺たちに魅力がないのなら魅力のある外付け装備に頼るのだ。そうプレゼントなんだよ、しずきくん。
A quick and dirty strategy to assassin strike. Manipulate someone's feelings with an expensive gift. To Sojiro, this sounded like his best chance. The approach was easy for him to grasp, and he appreciated its simplicity. However, he had the same concern as with the first approach. A step was missing, and without the step, the plan was bound to fail.
あとはまあ剣ってやつ？俺にはよくわかんないけどさ、やりすぎると悪い印象を持たれるとか殿下が言ってたな。私今落とされてるっ って意識させちゃダメなんだとよ。付き合った後であれ私落とされたと気づかせるのが上等なんだとか。
Though Sojiro did not quite grasp that details, he understood the basic idea: don't press your luck. He knew that much was good advice. He would have to try extremely hard to get on Alice's good side. And he could tell it would be a long process to get there. Sojiro recalled the time he had wandered inside the fox territory in the mountains. He had left some food on the ground for the fox, and then it never bothered him again. What is considered goodwill and kindness varies from person to person. But if there is enough goodwill from one side, regardless of whether that goodwill is reciprocated, the other side will eventually start to feel an obligation to do so. That was key.
大丈夫。考えてるよ。とりあえず自分にできることとか、したいことをしようと思う。安心してくれ。青崎に忠告されたことすらきちんと守る方針だ。
Sojiro seemed ready to face things head on. His instinct did little to reassure Aoko. However, she found herself more concerned about his safety than ever before. I think it's winter. Everyone's
学
wearing
校
coats.
にあるようなほうきが欲しい。
そうなんだ。できれば安く買えるところ。
しずきの家、アパートよね。ほうきなんてもの必要とは思えないけど。
いや、ちょっと気になるところがあって掃除がしたいんだ。ゴミ袋もあると助かる。
Whenever I read a Japanese visual novel, the girls are always under 5'3" or 4. I don't think I ever read a Japanese visual novel where the girls over 5'4". They're always like really fucking short. I think Saber's like 4'11". I don't
無駄
remember.
な出費はできないって言ってたくせに。
And Shido was like 5'4". I'm like, what the fuck?
まあどうでもいいけど、うちのでよければ使う？
Basically, I think this girl is probably like 5 foot.
多分1日じゃ終わらないから自分で買うよ。元から欲しかったものだし、あると便利だよ、ほき。
Sojiro was on his way home from his part-time job at the school. It was 4 in the afternoon, 2 hours earlier than his part-time job, but had normally ended. The Mad Bear head chef had gotten in trouble with the accountant for making his student work on the day before exam. That Sojiro boss had cheerfully sent him home early. And that is when it happened. The interruption of his standard schedule must have been just the shock he needed. What's up, John? Normally he would meet up with Ako after she was done with student council affairs and go home with her. However, today Sojiro was asking the other student who worked at the same place if he knew any shops in the area where he could buy a broom.
田舎者の趣味って理解不能ね。推強すぎ。
I like her hair.
うちの近くにまっついラーメン屋あるでしょ。あそこの通りを終わりまで行けば起きたって金物店がある。一式揃えるなら西口のホームセンターより安く上がるわ。どうでもいいけど、私のチャリ使う？どうせ試験明けまで使わないし。
Sojiro's eyes lit up as if he had met his savior. But biking uphill to the mansion, let alone with a package to carry, was not a pretty
い
thought.
や、自転車には乗ってみたいけど、今回は遠慮するよ。じゃあ、また明日、学校で。
Saying farewell to his co-worker, he headed to the hardware store. He needed a cheap and sturdy bamboo broom and a large dustpan to go with it. If possible, a pushcart and a stick for Splint would have been nice too. As it happened, Sojo wanted quite a few things. More Mahoyo? Yeah. I was just in the mood. I finished watching Demon Slayer, so it makes me want to play Mahoyo. Alice returned to her work after something. The Guanji estate had an annex that housed the library. The library was filled with books handed down to her from her mother, so it was Alice's territory such that even Alko dared not enter. That the mansion was a witch abode, left behind by the times. The library was a fairy tale quarters lost to the ages. It was a natural sanctuary for the young witch, who could command employees to do her bidding. She relied on her memory to recall the location of each book on the many shelves. And then she saw it. Upon raising her head, she was met with the most unusual of sights. Her elegant eyebrows bristled in distaste. From that moment on, she failed to accomplish anything she had planned for that day. She was instead forced to stare at a strange sight outside her window, eyebrows fixed in that position until the sunset. Is that the stars? That look like stars, yeah. That makes sense. You can see the stars sometime when the sunset. You can see Mars, I think, too, right? When the sunset, or Venus, I forgot. Oh well. Moving to the Grand Mansion on the hill had not brought any major changes to Sojiro's day-to-day schedule. He woke up, went to his part-time job, ate breakfast, and went to school. Classes came and went, still strange and new, broken up by rare and brief moments of rest until the school day is over. He left school, went to his part-time job, slept, woke up, and studied for exam. The modest life for the modest young man, continuing every day in the same fashion despite his best effort to change his fortune. But nothing ever really changes. Whether Alko was by his side in the mansion, as was frequently the case, or whether Alice was making him drink some potions she prepared before going to bed. The former was an attempt by Alko to make him feel better. The latter was some attempt to keep him safe, even if he did not fully appreciate it. Then one day, a day like any other, while Sojo was pouring himself some tea, as he was worried over the lack of change in his life. His relationship with Anko was the same as ever, but there was one major change this morning. He was drinking black tea instead of green. Huh? Though there were all sorts of different types of tea to be found in the kitchen, a newcomer to the world of tea like Sojiro could not tell one of them from the next. Naturally, his tea-making skills was limited to tea bags, one of which he placed his cup before returning to the dining table. Alice and Alko were already seated. The two was eating in silence. In his household, there was everyone for themselves when it came to the breakfast. The diplomatic description of their breakfast would be simple. The more accurate description would be 2 slices of stale bread prepared in seconds. Alko exchanged a word or two with Alice, took a sip of tea, and stood up from her seat. Since it was winter break for the high schooler, Alice, she returned to her room after eating as she normally did, while Akko headed to the front door, shoes in hand, ready for school. After hurriedly clearing the table, Sojiro rushed out of the door after Akko. Together they walked down the long hill in the direction of school. The window looked broken. They had spent 3 days following this very simple routine. 3 days? Okay.
ところで、あれから動きはあった？
Ikoki. School had ended and evening had arrived. Butter bread roll in one hand, Alice replied with a simple, silent shake of her head.
そう。ならあっちも次の手を考えているんでしょうね。魔術師本体の居場所は見当ついてる？
I like her necklace. Her response was exactly the same. And they all wore turtlenecks, man. What the fuck? Without showing the slightest sign of dejection, she continued to chew the roll and took a stab at her salad.
そう。私も試験が終わったら手伝うから、それまで悪いけど一人でやってて。今日からあのバカを一夜漬けにしなくちゃいけないんで、
It is
余裕ない
cold
の。
in winter time, so I guess that's why they wear turtlenecks. Alice threw, whatever.
問題ないでしょ？アリスはもう休みに入ってるんだから、一日全部使えるじゃない。
Alice was indeed on vacation. You could spend all day, every day on her work as a mage. Yet she had spent the past few days holed up in the library instead. She was hardly devoting herself to dealing with the challenger, as Akko put it.
アリス？聞いてる？
聞いてる？聞いてる？
わかってる。今夜からそっちもやるから。
I like Alice's character design a lot. Sighing, she stood up. I think I like it more than Akko. I'm sorry, Akko. What was bothering Alice, and what was it she wanted to say? What had she been doing only 2 hours earlier? The young witch took her leave from the breakfast table without offering a single clue. Well, I would say Akko have bigger tits than Alice, I guess, for what it's worth. But I don't know. I think it's because Alice kind of reminds me a little bit of Hisue, and I kind of like Hisue. Misaki High was a private school, and as such, its winter break started earlier than public schools. The end of term ceremony was mid-December, followed by a brief respite before the next term began. And Hisue reminds me of Saber, so it's like that, of course. That's why I like Alice. God damn it, too many fucking words. I like Alice character design more because it reminds me of Hisue, and Hisue reminds me of Saber. You like Alice design? Both her and Akko have turtlenecks, yeah. I think I read that part already. Uh-oh. The radio continue is broadcast late into the night. A thermos of hot tea limited the need to venture down to the kitchen. An electric blanket kept away the winter cold, and a crab-shaped pastry starved off any din-time hunger. And these were the lengths Akko had gone to. She needed to ensure that every aspect of her surrounding helped her pull a successful all-nighter.
期末試験1日目、ご苦労様。
They had exams?
それで、生まれ変わる覚悟できた？
Oh, not yet. Sojiro nodded earnestly. Upon returning from work, he encountered not the maid she expected, but the Demon Student Council President Aozaki. Half a day earlier. The first day of exams were over, and Sojiro was about to head back to the mansion, where he hoped to put his plan into practice when...
今夜私の部屋で監禁ね。あ、夕方からのアルバイトは当然キャンセル。ちょっと本気であの点数はありえないから。
A cold blue grin greeted him in the hallway. Clenched in her fist was Sojiro's exam paper. Mr. Yamashiro had no doubt said.
ま、転校してきたばかりだし、しょうがないよね。
But she had snatched the exam out of the teacher's hand the minute he tried to show her. That was how Sojiro had ended up in Aoko's room, instead of the room in the attic, to which he was accustomed. Though her situation was far from normal, at the end of the day, she was an adolescent girl like any other. Naturally, she felt uncomfortable letting a boy her own age into her room. However, his grades were truly something that called for desperate measures. That explained why her mood was even worse than known today. The vein on her forehead was pulsing visibly with anger.
先に自分の復讐済ませる。あんたはそのテーブル使ってて。
Aiko turned her back to him and sat down at her favorite desk. Sojiro was left standing before a cheap-looking glass table.
なんかいろいろと慣れないな。なあ、青崎、この青いのなんだ？
Restless, Sojiro found his eyes drawn to the guitar propped up in the corner.
なんか薄いし青いしとんがってるし、きっと青崎のことだし、もしかしなくても武器か。
楽器よそれ。エレキはともかくアコギは音楽室で似たようなのあったでしょ。あとこれ以上青々言ったらそのとんがってるので殴るからね。
Sojiro plopped himself down into a cushion, struggling to suppress a desire to retort that it was a weapon after all.
ちょっとは落ち着きなさいよ。いつもは耳の遠い大型犬みたいに鈍感なくせに。何か気になるものでもあるの？
Kiyonaru, what are you curious about? The fact it was Aoko who was oblivious for once. For his part, Sojiro could not figure out why he felt so restless either. Suffice it to say, they were both pretty clueless in this moment.
もしかして内装？この部屋の家具のグレードが今とは違うから不思議がってるのね。ここベッド以外は私の家から持ち込んだものなの。引っ越してから2年経つけどまだ屋敷には馴染んでないでしょ。
Though she understood the real reason for Sojiro's nervousness, Aiko seemed satisfied that she had resolved Sojiro's anxiety for the time being and returned to her studies. She flipped through her notes and textbook as if fast-forwarding a tape. There was no opening for an outsider like him to intrude in her high-speed study session. Repelled by her intensity, he retreated to the table. He was at least sensitive enough to pick up on her desire to be left alone. It was a testament to Sojiro that having his needs utterly ignored was now second nature to him, to the extent that he could now happily go about his business. I don't know the last two words. 2 hours passed. Then, as the clock neared 11, Ako's speed and concentration began to slip. Seeing his window of opportunity, Sojiro seized the moment to strike up a conversation.
青崎、ちょっといいかな。
何？
She spoke hesitantly, not bothered to turn to face him. She continued to flip the pages of her textbook, albeit at a slower speed than before.
この3日間、青崎たちの夕食事情を見てきたけど、君たちの食事はいつもああなのか？
そうだけど、おかしい？
そう言われると困るな。ただ学校じゃみんな楽しそうだった。誰かと食事をとるってことはああいう風になることだって思ってた。だからもしかすると。
もしかしないわよ。別にあんたのせいでアリスと話さないわけじゃないわ。私たちはいつもああだから。
Ago spoke calmly with her back still turned, seemingly unaware at what he was getting at.
張り詰めた食卓だな。青崎とアリスは仲がいいと思ってたのに。
She neither confirmed nor denied his statement. She was, however, surprised by the disappointed tone in which he had made it.
ま、張り詰めた食卓っていうのは合ってるわね。アリスが何回あんたの飲み物にメスカリンを入れてたかなんてもう覚えてないし、昨日なんか堂々とサラダの中に7かまどなんか混ざってるし。ほんと、あの子何考えてるんだろう。
A bitter smile spread across her face in reminiscence. The pages of her textbook continued to turn.
メスカリン？
サボテンから取れるアルカロイドよ。アリスが使う以上、ただの幻覚剤じゃないでしょうけどね。と、私はこんなもんでいっか。
With that, Slim shut her fourth textbook of the night. After having scarcely changed position the whole night, she finally turned in her chair to face him.
さあ、今度はあんたを仕込まなくちゃね。
Damn, dude, it's 11
今日の
p.m.
4科目の答案、実に宗十郎らしい出来栄えでそっと押しそうになったわ、私。
Sojiro Rashi. Her tone was light, but her gaze was heavy as she stared at Sojiro, seated cross-legged on the floor.
原告、地理、数学、電子工学。あの調子であと2日続けたら、冬休みが消えるのは当然でしょうね。そうなると困るのは私なのよ、実際。
いや、俺も困るぞ。休みなのに学校に行くのはなんか気が乗らない。
Sojiro calmly corrected her.
そりゃあ私のセリフだ。あんたが学校に行くってことは必然こっちまでとばっちりが来るっての。
All could she think about, as much as she tried not to, was Mr. Yamashita and his knowing grin.
それ以前に私の目が黒いうちはオール赤なんてやつは許さない。本来なら少年から叩き直すところだけど、ま、あんたはいろいろ事情があるからとりあえず点数だけで勘弁してあげる。私もテストは一夜漬けで片付ける方だから、あんた一人仕込むのにそう時間はかからないだろうし。
Sojiro's expression openly soured in response to her declaration. It was obvious he did not think he needed her meddling in his studies.
あんたね、苦労するのは私とあなた、どっちだと思う
Sojiro got the feeling that it would be him, but he nodded slowly nonetheless. Then again, it would probably take more effort on her part than on his, and in any case, he knew there was no way to talk her out of it.
この度はご迷惑をおかけします。
Sojiro summarily bowed his head to show gratitude and willingness to work.
よろしい。安心なさい。私だって鬼じゃないから。 別に平均点狙うってわけでもなし。予定通りこなしていけば3時には眠れるわよ。
At 3 a.m. She nodded with satisfaction, pleased with his studious attitude. He had plenty of obstacles ahead of him, but that sense of humility might be enough to see him through.
って何仏心出してるんだ私。いいしずきくん、この後頼られちゃたまんないから釘刺しておくけど、私がマンツーマンで誰かを仕込むなんてことめったにないから、これはあくまで異例中の異例だって覚えておいてね。
She spoke more to convince herself than him, but his expression still darkened. It made one want to hang his side around his neck that read, "Please take me home," like an abandoned pet. Aoko chided herself for being so soft. For some reason in that moment, she recalled that it had been raining that day, the day they met each other. Time passed like the falling grains of an hourglass. And then he gets to go to sleep. Aoko squinted as light poured through the window and she downed another cup of tea. She had lost count exactly how many she had drank long ago.
一晩かかったね、大崎。
It's tea to help her stay awake, like caffeine. Sojiro picked up on what she left unspoken. Aoko had used up all of her pep. And staying up all night, but also in shouting at him. He looked pale and comfortable, just as he had all night long.
ええ、甘く見てたわ、あんたのことを。
だから褒めても何も出ないって。
ある意味褒めるに値するかもね。
She was at the end of her rope, but she could not help the bit of pride that swelled up in her. His lack of even the most basic comprehension was shocking, even taking into account his upbringing into the wilderness. His ability was that of a middle school student, and that was being generous. Preparing him for exams by teaching him new concepts and ideas was a waste of time. Rote memorization was his only hope for passing. Everything he memorized could collapse in a house of cards afterwards, for all she cared, so long as she remembered for her exams. Assuming he had the capacity to be a good student in the first place had been her mistake. It took all night to cover the content for just 4 exams, and she still did not feel confident he could apply what he so earnestly tried to.
でもね、真面目なのはいいことだけど、あんた暗記するのに時間かかりすぎ。
そこは多めに見てほしい。今まで頭より体で覚えることのが多かったんだ。
Akko let out an exasperated sigh. Naturally, physical prowess mattered more in mountain life than the intellectual kind, but still.
まあいいわ。これで山城からあんたの成績について相談されることもないでしょうし。紅茶もう一杯入れてくれる？
Sojiro stood up in the bay as Akko stretched her arcing back. She had apparently brought the tea bags in bulk, so there were still plenty to use. But they gotta study a lot.
無駄遣いだな、青崎は。
It's because Sojiro doesn't know anything. He spoke under his breath, so she wouldn't hear. It made him somehow happy to see her so tired and unfocused after the grueling all-night lessons she had given him. It did not cross his mind that the excess tea bags, far from being an indulgent purchase, was purchased intentionally to sustain them through the night. A relaxed expression came across Aoko's face as she watched him, naive and peaceful as could be.
悪くないけど、せめてリーフティーで入れられるように仕込まなくちゃダメかな。
Seems to have overheard her not so inner monologue Sojo made to face her.
やっぱり味は違うのか？
違う違う、もう全然。正直私はどうでもいいんだけど、アリスはね、かなりお茶にはうるさいよ。そうだ、宗十郎、アリスとうまくいってる
Aoko cheerfully slumped over the table, not covered with textbooks and scribbled notes. Sojo watched her with a hint of resentment in his eyes.
彼女と会えるのは食事の時だけで、食事と言ったらあれだろ？どうやって仲良くなれって言うんだ？
そう？私は十分脈ありだと思ったけど。そっちはアリスを怖がってないし、アリスはそっちを追い出す理由を見つけようと躍起になってるし。いい条件よ、これって。
全然わからないな。あの子とこっちの関係は遊園地前の青崎と俺の関係と同じじゃないか。一体どこがいい条件なんだ？
とりあえず反目し合ってはいないでしょ。一方通行の関係だけど、それはそれ。アリスにしちゃ上出来っていうか、理由を探している時点で可能性ありってね。あの子は反感に応えることが癖になっちゃってるから、大抵相手を自滅させちゃうのよ。
Her ominous words only confused Sojiro further.
知ってしまえば単純な話なんだけどね、あの子の場合。ただ、
whether or not he could put it in practice was another story altogether.
難しいよ。
I'm getting
青崎
tired.
は。
It's getting pretty late. He carried her teacups back to the table as he spoke. Aoko picked up hers up and took a sip of it to spell her
Oh.
satisfaction.
確かに君の言う通りだ。俺はまだあの子の顔しか知らない。クオンジ・アリスという名前すら定かじゃないのは問題があるね。
He followed Ako's lead and took a sip of his own. His cup contained not tea but plain hot water.
あの子のこと教えてほしい？
Ako scrutinized him carefully as she sat. Most boys would have been captivated by her gaze in that moment.
いや、そういうことは本人に聞いてあげるべきだと思う。
But he ignored her and stared straight ahead, as if speaking directly to Alice herself.
そうね。ほんと、あんたってアリス好みの対応をするわ。ねえ、前から気になってたけど、客室でアリスに何を言ったの？いくら私との約束とはいえ、あの子が部外者を半日も放置するなんてありえないのよ。
He thought back to that moment. He could recall only 2 or 3 words he had exchanged with Alice after awakening in the guest room. He did not recall the conversation being anything special, but he could not bring himself to casually share it with Ako now. After all.
ねえ、どんなセリフであの子の気を変えたの
Ako eagerly pressed him for answers. Sojo frowned, unsure of what to say. He did not know what the interaction had been like for Alice, but for him it had felt special, sacred almost. The question was why and for whom was he so concerned?
ほら、白状しなさいってば。隠し事なんて似合わないわよ。
Her disconcerting smile moved even closer. Sojo did not look like he was able to stay silent much longer. As he would eventually come to realize, Aoko Aozaki had a sometimes troubling propensity to gossip.
まあ、あの子と何を話したかは言わないけど、今の青崎に比べれば花もロマンもなかったのだけは確かかな。
ロマン。
さっきまでは青崎が鬼みたいだったからいいもんだなって気がつかなかった。
He said directly into her eyes as he spoke. Ako nearly leaped out of her seat in panic. Now that he pointed it out, she realized her bodies were practically touching.
仕方ないでしょ。この方が効率良かったんだから。あんた横にいないとすぐ間違えるし。
Ako stood up as she lashed back at him.
そうだね。なんか昔みたいで久しぶりに集中できた。これが異例中の異例っていうのが本当に残念だ。
Exception.
余裕あるじゃない。その分じゃ今日のテストだけじゃなく、アリスとの話し合いもうまくいきそうね。宗十郎。
あ、それはもちろん。
His cool response caught her off guard, and for a moment she was at a loss for words. She meant it sarcastically, and yet he responded with a warm smile.
方針変更だ。まずは近くで話しかけてみるよ。嫌なことはいずれ終わるって分かったから。
Aka remained in a state of silent shock as he spoke and rose from his feet. She could not help but feel reluctant respect for what seemed to be his newfound confidence and competence.
とりあえず今日は一人で帰ってアリスと話してみる。青崎は放課後生徒会だろ。
He was right. It was the last meeting before winter break. Normally, he would have waited until the meeting ended, or else gone straight to his part-time job. This was part of Ako's plan to make sure he and Alice were never alone in the mansion together.
待った。まさかあんた一人でアリスとやり合うつもりなの？
Yes.
別にやり合うつもりはないぞ。し合っても勝てないだろう、アリスには。
Her reply made complete sense, which floored her.
でも、青崎がいたら話が複雑になるのは目に見えてるんだ。そんなわけで、今日はゆっくり飛び丸の相手でもしててくれ。
本気？
He felt like he was being tested, but nodded nonchalantly nonetheless. Knowing how great the situation really was, Ako was not sure how to respond to his apparent lack of concern. The morning light came through the window, marked a stark contrast between the two. There stood bathed in light? Question mark. Which lurked in darkness? Then went without saying. The silence lasted for only a brief moment. Staring at him gravely, she said,
なら止めはしないわ。
That was all she had. Her dry tone hit the significance of her pregnant silence. Hold on, man. Hey, man, who the fuck translated this shit? I've been reading this for a while, and you know, I know a little bit Japanese, right? At least to get by for a little bit. And a lot of that shit they be saying and reading, that's why I kind of like stop reading a little bit sometimes when they talk. And when they start talking, because I'm like, all right. I mean, that's how it is, right? English, Japanese. But then when they start adding hard words in Japanese, I'm like, okay, I gotta read it. And then when I read it, I was like, now I'm reading this shit. I'm like, what the fuck? Unless, you know, I wouldn't be surprised. Maybe Nasu did write that in. Nasu is a weird motherfucker. He is a chuny. I don't even know if this is chuny though. What the hell? I don't know, man. Fuck it, keep going.
なんか怒ってないか大崎
Learn more English? I don't even know if that's real or not. I never read the original,
何か
so
考えはあるの？
it might be real.
下手な考えは通じないわよ、あの子には。
But what the fuck does a pregnant silence even mean? Now you got me. I gotta Google that shit. Alright. I gotta Google. What does pregnant silence mean? Pregnant? Pregnant silence is a quiet moment in a conversation that is full of deep meaning, tension, or expectation. The word pregnant here means full of potential. Oh, that's what pregnant means! Oh, shit! Man, see, it's Nasu being a weird motherfucker again. Fucking, Nasu's a fucking chuny, dude. I never read any of Nasu work in Japanese. It's always with either... It's only fan translations, right? Only read fan translations. The only official translation I ever read was Tsukihime remake. Nasu. I've seen people... The people that I saw their opinion that they read Nasu work in Japanese. They said that he really loves to use... You like to use big words and words no one ever fucking uses. You like to come up with like... Basically shit like this. Pregnant silence. I bet Nasu wrote that shit. Nasu wrote that shit. They had to translate. They're like, what the fuck? Nasu's a chuny, dude. He's a freaking chuny. And he will always be a chuny. And that's why he's the GOAT. He knew it would be hard to get close to her through talk alone. In fact, it felt nearly impossible.
言葉で落ちないやつは物で釣れ。
Kinomi had been the voice of wisdom and folly for him countless times in the past. Incidentally, Kinomi had been referred to Ako at the time he shared that pearl of wisdom. But Soichiro had a distinct impression that trying to buy Aozaki kindness with gifts would not end well. Nasu? Nasu is weird.
アリスの趣味
Not a
ない
maybe.
じゃないか考えてみると今の自分と彼女
He
は
is
まるで
weird.
接点がない
But that's why he's also cool. He can't be normal and write something good. You gotta be a little bit weird.
いつものことだけど、
Just a little
何
bit.
も考えてなかったわけね。
うんでもまああれこれ考えなくてもいいと思うアリスにはあれこれ説明するとか分かってもらおうとかそういうんじゃなくてなんていうか
He pondered intently as he tried to put his vague thoughts into something concrete, but he did not spend much time in thought. With a nod, he concluded.
要は、俺が彼女を好きかどうかってことじゃないか？
He articulated that which is often hard to say, but surprisingly clarity and calm. With a certainly prerequisite for the task he hoped to achieve, he had no hope of making her appreciate him with words, or with acts of giving with the expectation of reciprocation. See all these big ass words, man. God damn it, Nasu. He simply wished to get to know her better because he liked her. That was his honest, uncontrived intention and reflected the purity of his heart. See, Nasu really loved big words. I don't know why. It does sound cool. But whether that was his best interest or not was another story altogether. Calculation and compromise, selfishness and conflict. Purity such as has often irritated people who believe that morals went against human nature. It's just you gotta remember too though. The only books I usually read is just visual novel. And not even just normal visual novel, honestly. It's mostly just dating sims. And story and dating sim require the most elementary school words as possible. Nasu work is on another level of elementary school. Possibly middle school. Possibly the 8th grade. His work is like around that level. That's just too hard for me. Right? So going from like the typical visual novels that I typically read, right? From dating sim to reading a Nasu work, I'm like, man, I gotta put my thinking hat on. Or rather, people who were inevitably forced to believe it. Ako silently walked away without responding to what Sojiro said. Her long hair swung from side to side as she passed him.
Ozaki?
Noting her strangely cold manner, he called out to her. However, she had already opened the door to leave.
下でシャワー浴びてくるから、あなたは自分の部屋に戻ってて。
Her words lacked any expressive inflection. In his confusion, all Sojiro could do was nod.
いいけど、やっぱり怒ってないか、青崎。
Emotion returned to her face as he spoke. Yet it was not the typical irritated look to which he had grown so accustomed.
そうね。あんた流に言えば、多分私は怒ってる。何に対してのものかは、あんまり言いたくないけど。
Poor Sojiro did not even realize that he himself was the reason. She looked at him. For an instant he witnessed an emotion on her face, of which she had never seen the likes of before.
じゃあね。これが最後になるかもしれないから、お別れぐらいは言っておくわ。あなたはアリスを甘く見すぎてる。
Dang.
でも、それが同時にあんたの強みなのよね。私たちには毒にしかならないけれど。
The door slammed loudly shut behind her. All she wanted to do was just protect Sojiro. Her steps were audible as she walked away on the other side of the wall. The corridor must have been nearly freezing without any central heating, but Ako seemed perfectly comfortable.
なんで私から出ていくんだ。
This is her room.
順番が逆。普通先に出てくのはそっちじゃない。
I thought she was going to take a shower. Ako promptly kicked Sojiro out of her room. Once again, the wooden door closed with a slam. The corridor was not as cold as he had expected. Not quite as bad as the freezer, at least. Saving. Hey, I think it's a good stopping point. I'm not gonna lie. I'm pretty out of breath too. So, good save. How you save in this game? Oh, place a bookmark. And that's how you save. Hey, GG's. Damn, dude. Oh, that's 11:40. I thought I was about to say, is it really 1 again? Hey, no, it's not 1 a.m. It's almost. I'm pretty tired. That's GG's. We'll play more next time. GG's for now.